Hello there. I thought I'd take a moment to give you an idea of the courses that I took at SFA the past year and any tips I have for how you can succeed in those classes and perhaps some information on how difficult the classes are and how much time you'll have to devote to those courses. Now, if you look at my transcript here, you'll see that I have Advanced Psychopathology as a transfer credit. This doesn't affect this year's classes, but next year it'll mean that in my final semester in the spring, I won't be able to talk about this course at SFA because I've already taken it at a different university and have successfully transferred it in. But for the fall semester, fall of 2019, as you can see, I had 3 courses. And in fact, every semester you're supposed to have 3, except for my final semester, spring of, 2021, I won't have a 3rd course due to that transfer credit. The first course is Psychology Pro Seminar. So this course is a seminar course, which essentially means that there's a lot of discussion. It's back and forth. There's very, very little lecture. In fact, I think the only lecture we had was in talking about grant writing. But this course is designed to prepare you, one, for your thesis when you're on the thesis track, and it talks about sort of begin thinking about your ideas now. One of the assignments is to prepare you for the thesis in the fall of your second year. The rest of the course was devoted to topics in psychology as a career. So how do you write a vita? How do you write a grant? What are the important areas to cover in a letter of intent for applying to a PhD program? How do you decide what each of these programs, how do you know what each of these programs does and line it up with what you're interested in applying to graduate school and so on. It was not a particularly difficult class because a lot of it is opinion-based. You're held responsible for having an engaged discussion, so coming to class prepared and being able to discuss the material that's on the docket for the day. Now, each of these courses only meets once a week, which means that any in-person course is a 2.5-hour session once a week. And so we did end up finding that with only 4 of us, we had some issues in sustaining a discussion for the full class period on some of the topics. I think this is mostly due to the topics in that we each have different amounts to say on different topics and that some of them just were not as engaging for us as a group. And we know that from the second years who went through this course a year before us that they had no issues maintaining the full 2.5 hours. And I think part of that is that they had 7 students going through instead of 4. I'd say be prepared with your reading and you'll be able to handle things quite well. And I'd say it seemed like about 2 to 3 hours to prepare for this course each week. And then a fair bit of time for the final binder where all of the assignments were due at the end of the semester. Next, we have univariate statistics. This is essentially undergraduate statistics in psychology at a more in-depth level. And given that statistics doesn't really change, it's the same as all undergraduate statistics courses in the analysis it talks about, but it's different in that we're really moving into psychological examples. And at the master's level, we're really talking about the ambiguity. So does null hypothesis significance testing have flaws? Well, the answer is yes. What are the flaws? And how do people disagree with that? And how do we solve the flaws even if people disagree? And the answer is largely Bayesian statistics, but people disagree on that too. So sort of dealing with the ambiguity and how do we justify what analysis we're doing and how do we be informed consumers of research that other people have done? How does sample size influence the outputs of all these different statistics? And this very helpful course. I'd say it's challenging in that I often took 4 or 5 hours preparing the homework and reading the chapter and getting ready for the next week of classes. That by doing the homework, you really are preparing yourselves well for the tests, and that by taking the practice tests, you will be well prepared for the tests. Although I will say studying for the test was a labor-intensive endeavor, and you should have a good bit of time set aside as you prepare for each of these tests. But the practice test being representative of the test you will be taking is a very helpful point. Only thing I'd specifically say is that when we talk about interpolation is sort of a procedure, not a formula. And so on the formula chart you're given, how to complete the steps for interpolation doesn't come up. So if you want to do that for the first test, you should memorize the different steps. Next class is Advanced Research Design. Again, like an undergraduate course in research design. However, at this point, we're really going into more practical concepts of, well, we know all of these different topics. Now go do them. So this course, you're supposed to do 2 research design projects, and we ended up doing 1, with the second one just falling short on time and ending up being transferred into the spring semester. And then, well, you know what happened in the spring. So it's currently postponed, and we'll see how things finish up with being able to finish that project. Although, as you can see, grades were not withheld for it. As it's not a difficult course in that it makes your head hurt all the time, but it's a difficult course in that there's a lot that you are responsible for in designing a study and being able to conduct it and analyze it. And so I definitely come prepared to work, but that if you've had research design courses before, you should be largely familiar with what is going on in this course. And so if you're willing to work, you'll get through things just fine. And then the amount of work depends largely on the studies you're designing. How much review do you have to do? One of the assignments is preparing a poster so that you can present your research at a local conference in the spring. So how long does it take to move your data into a form that can be analyzed, and then analyzing it and writing up in your literature review? And so it can be very time consuming, but it depends on what you're doing specifically. For the spring, the first year, we have 3 courses. We have the first course, multivariate statistics. And this course is largely why this semester was more difficult than the last semester. Is multivariate statistics, unlike univariate statistics, which is based on the general linear model, though technically multivariate statistics is based on the general linear model, but just sort of beyond it. We're dealing with how does our data show up in 3-dimensional space, so looking with multiple variables at multiple data sets, and how does everything fit together? Of what does the sort of amorphous blob that encompasses our data look like, and the relationships that are conveyed therein. The professor definitely wants a whole lot of detail in the answers you give him, and that I'd say that it's safer to go over an assignment if you don't think you've fully answered the question. And so if you have a 2-page assignment, but you think that you could really write another page and not repeat yourself, add the 3rd page. I'd also say that the answer to a question does not necessarily end at the answer at the end of the question they've asked. That there is a lot of detail that can be expected from you as a graduate student and in multivariate statistics. And so it's, again, safer to say, I've answered the question, but I've left these things unsaid that sort of go along with whatever the question is, that don't necessarily need to be said, but it's safer to say them because the professor likes that level of detail, and it's a way to demonstrate that you are familiar with the material. Now, this is a little bit different in that with the shutdown and how that occurred, we went online for the second half of the semester, in that all of the midterm, the final, and the final paper were sort of packaged up, and they said, all right, answer these in as much detail as you can. So your mileage may vary in a fully in-person course, but I'd say err on the side of too much detail rather than too little. Again, a very challenging course. Preparing the midterm, final, and final paper, basically, I would say it took about a week of morning to night work. So spread out over a larger period, I'd easily say, 20 hours to prepare for each test and to write the final paper. Next, we have cognitive psychology. This is a good course. Again, challenging, but I didn't take undergraduate cognitive psychology, so I can't really speak to how it's similar or different. Just that you go over the areas of cognition, so learning, attention, memory, and you bring in a lot of neuroscience. I'd say the most challenging part of this course was how each week, after the first week, someone would be presenting on a review article from, say, Nature or Science that talked about the subject we were covering that week. And those came back as questions in essay format on the midterm and the final test. And so you'd be given, let's say you had 5 articles between the start of the semester and the midterm. Each of those would have its own question, and 2 of them would be randomly selected to be answered. And so you have a week to prepare, but you have to sort of prepare your answers and then memorize your answers so that you are ready for whichever questions come up. And I'd say that took up a lot of time. I'd say preparing for the midterm, it took me 8 hours on a Saturday to read all of the articles again and go through and find the answers to the questions, and then a continued amount of work to learn those answers and expand on the answers in areas that sort of seemed weak as I went through the rest of the week for the test on Thursday. But if you're studying, you're keeping up with your studying, flashcards perhaps, you can definitely do well in this course just from learning the material. And finally, I have teaching seminar. This was taught by the same professor who taught Psychology Pro Seminar, except that this was online. I'd say that made it a little bit easier in that there wasn't this 2.5-hour window to fill with discussion, but that being online, you don't have quite the same amount of engagement, that the back and forth in real time led to greater specificity in our discussions than was possible for us in an online format. I would say that there was more work in reading and that it took longer to prepare. So if Pro Seminar took about 3 hours to prepare, this was more like 4 or 5 hours to prepare. And that it really was interesting, although as a certified teacher, much of it was familiar to me. And while it's useful, I'm not sure that it will be useful to you. If you have an interest in teaching, this course can bring it out. And if that's true, I'd say it's very useful for you. But even if it's not, you're not interested in teaching, I think it does have some relevancy in that whether or not you're teaching someone at your job someday, or you're teaching your children how to do something, or teaching a friend how to do something, an understanding of teacher pedagogy is useful, just not as useful as other things, in my opinion. And so I definitely pay attention in the course, but if anything has to go in terms of your scheduling this semester, I'd say this course is the one that you bump to the lowest priority. Same with Pro Seminar. They are useful courses, but they are not as demanding as the other courses you have to take. And so if you're struggling for time, this one and Pro Seminar are the ones that are easiest to get by in. Now, that's not saying that you should just try to get by, but if it comes down to it and you have to, that's how I would do it. As you can see, next semester, we'll be moving into thesis research, advanced developmental psychology, and biopsychology, with thesis writing and advanced social psychology in my final semester, with psychopathology being in that final semester for anybody who didn't transfer that course in like I did. So I hope this course is useful and you